Hey everyone, so we're back at it again, and we have the opportunity to interview Chief W5, James Williams. And I'm going to make sure that we have a good discussion and opportunity to interview and find out what he's all about, his legacy, his history in the military, and current things that he's got going on with him personally. So I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and here we go. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. James Williams. Hey, sir, how you doing?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me today. You've got a lot going for yourself. You haven't really taken the traditional route regarding your military career, and it's something that I want to have everyone have an understanding of. So, we're looking forward to this discussion today.
Likewise, again, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, typically how I like starting off my discussion on this thing that I've got going on, I like to really ask, give us a little bit of a background as far as who you are, your personal background, and then we could kind of get into the military side of town.
Be happy to. First of all, I want to say to all the Army Warrant Officers, happy 102nd birthday.
Ooh. Speaking of which, thank you for
there's a
that
video
cue.
out for that.
Thank you for that cue real fast there. Let me
Absolutely.
give the warrant officers a little bit of a shout out today, and I hope that y'all enjoy this video here. Here we go.
The question has changed. The standard has changed. It's no longer what do you want. You see, I've learned everybody on the face of this planet, they want something. Everybody that comes into this world, they want something. Everybody wants greatness. Everybody wants excellence. But the question is, what are you willing to go through in order to get it? What type of dedication? What type of commitment? What type of sacrifice? Because I guarantee you, everything you want, you will come up against something that's going to test you and see how bad you really want it. Some opposition, some adversity, some challenge. In other words, you will come up against life. It's going to test you to see how bad you want what it is that you say you want. So the next time you get ready to say you want something, I need you to reframe it and say, what am I willing to go through in order to get it?
Oh man, if that don't get you fired up for a conversation, I don't know what will, man.
I tell you what, I feel like joining all over again, except 31 years is plenty. So I'm going to pass the torch to the next generation.
I hear you. So let's go into, your background and everything like that, Chief.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me. To all the Army Warrant Officers around the globe, men and women, all branches, happy 102nd birthday. Otis, my path has been, quite frankly, unconventional since birth. I am a native of Cleveland, Ohio, born to teenage parents who did not finish high school. My mom was 16, my dad was 17. And in August 30th of 1964, here I come. Many years following, I would have a brother, 2 additional sisters. And if you can imagine, in the years of the 60s and 70s, emergence to prosperity for young Black families, particularly those who were teenagers and non-educated, was a very daunting task in terms of economics.
Absolutely.
So as a result of that, you can imagine the frustration, the domestic violence, if I may be very candid, resulted in mom being a single parent of 4 children. So being the oldest of 4, it was incumbent upon me to be responsible. I was seemingly the chosen one, unbeknownst to me.
Wow.
Did well in school, played sports, intramurally, ran track, loved to swim, all the typical things you do in an inner city neighborhood. What we found was that even though we were in a moderately middle class African-American neighborhood, we ourselves were poor. We did not own a home. My mother couldn't drive, so we did not own a car. We were fortunate enough to live in my grandparents, her parents' homes, which kept us out of the projects, to be quite frankly, because we certainly qualified. And so growing up, I, participated in the Upward Bound program, which is a program created by the late President Lyndon B. Johnson, which allowed cultural educational experiences to youth who wanted to excel beyond high school. Well, it turns out I did pretty well. And after graduating high school and went on to college, I actually received a scholarship for journalism, if you can believe that. So in 1985, I left my native Ohio and bound for Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, to attend Howard University. Great experience, very, very, very welcoming to see lots of Black intelligentsia that I had not seen in my east side of Cleveland, Ohio. If America was the land of milk and honey, Otis, she certainly passed the east side neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio, where I lived. So that just was not our day-to-day conversation. And so it was really refreshing to be there at Howard University. Unfortunately, my scholarship funds depleted, and I was in my class, and the administrator of Howard University came in and said, "Mr. Williams, we have a bill for $2,400 that you need to pay us, or else you're going to have to withdraw from the university."
Terrible.
Now, remember, I just shared I grew up very poor, public assistance. We didn't have the money. So there were only 2 choices: move back to Ohio and work somewhere, or just try to stick it out. So I had to withdraw. So I washed dishes, swept floors, mopped floors, washed dishes again. And then one day I was walking about and I saw this sign that pointed to me, said, "I want you. I want you." And I'm thinking, there's nobody in my family who's even in the military, much less college, which is what my goal was. So finally, I succumbed to the photo on the billboard. And that's how I joined the military, Otis. I joined the military simply to finish college. What started out as an 8-year reserve contract wound up being a 31-year career, consecutive career in the active and reserve component. So my message today is sometimes you choose your career, Otis, and other times your career chooses you. The Army chose me, and I was really better for it.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's a heck of I'm sure your story resonates with a lot of folks who, typically didn't have the means growing up, but still saw the opportunity and jumped at that opportunity.
That's right.
It's a heck of a thing to hear of, someone who grew up in not necessarily in the best situation, but persevered through time to where I see title as doctor. And that's something that, me as a host, me as a man of color, me as someone who wants to see military success, that puts a smile on my face. And I'm sure it's putting a smile on many other people's faces that's checking out our discussion.
Not the least of which my family's face. I did this for them. My mom never finished high school. My dad never finished high school. I was the first generation to graduate high school, then on to college. And so the PhD was an olive branch to say, this is what success looks like despite your circumstances. And so this is their doctorate degree as well, which is hanging above me here.
Hey, that's wonderful.
In my dissertation, I certainly thanked my Heavenly Father as a man of faith for granting me the fortitude and the resilience to come to an area that is very expensive in Washington, D.C., Took me many years, 2 jobs, school and reserves, as well as part-time jobs, to even sustain myself as a resident. What I would also say to those persons who are very fortunate enough to have parents and resources to pay for college, don't take advantage of it. Do not take advantage of it. But I tell you something, having self-financed my way through, I really have an appreciation for what I've accomplished. And it's not about chasing money. I've been tremendously blessed because I'm also in the cybersecurity space in my daily vocation. But I did this for the family tree. We don't have scholars in my family. We didn't have homeowners in my family. We didn't have military service members in my family. We were just trying to get by. So that can be an added pressure. But I rose to the challenge, and here I am today on your show.
You know, it's interesting. You said that you don't have scholars. You don't have necessarily the academia, I guess, inspirations within your left and your right, within your home growing up. But you found that resolve to want to do better, be better, and eventually became better than your preconceived or predetermined situation usually dictates. Tell to us about who were those mentors and those inspirations during your time coming up, unless it's in the presentation itself. Talk to me about those individuals.
Thank you for asking that question. It is not in the presentation, but it was my grandfather. My grandfather had a third grade education. He grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, one of 11 children. He could neither read or write. He would hold the Bible oftentimes upside down, but still in his mind, he's getting his spiritual guidance through that book. He owned property. Third grade education. That is what saved us. My grandparents owned 11 properties in the Cleveland area. So what I always tell people is that poverty is not only a state of mind, but it's not always generational. My mom had a fantastic childhood. Had everything she wanted, but she got pregnant at 15 with me. And it just became a spiraling way of life throughout our childhood. But my grandfather, with his infinite wisdom, his third grade education, and his signature that he used, an X, had wisdom beyond measure. I watched how he took care of my grandmother, who never had to work a day in her life. They would travel. They managed properties. My grandmother, quite frankly, was the salutatorian. So if there's any academic acumen in terms of high school, would be from her. She was second in her class that graduated salutatorian, the second highest GPA, if you will, in her class, growing up in Lexington, Kentucky. So watching those examples, even in the absence of my father, my brother and I would travel with my grandfather, paint houses, cut grass to maintain his properties, which was cheap labor to have his grandsons maintain properties. And so that's how I learned work ethic and stick-to-itiveness from him. Third grade education, couldn't read or write, but in all fairness, he lived a good life.
You know, your story kind of resonates with me personally. So I come from the Caribbean. I come from a family of, 7 of us, my siblings, and I and my mom and my dad. My mom had my oldest brother at 15. But now, my oldest brother, my parents divorced, of course, but my oldest brother, he's a chemical engineer. I've got a sister. She's a nurse practitioner. I got my youngest brother. He's about to be a doctor. I'm in media and military, but what was always that qualifying thing that neutralized, hurdles that came our way? It's always been education, and it's always been work ethic. We busted our tails. Growing up in East New York, Brooklyn wasn't always the easiest.
Oh man,
but
yes.
I always had a family, whether it be my extended family in the Caribbean or my mom, who served as an academic role model to me. We've always had that role model in front of us. And that's where I think mentors and role models play a significant role in forming the way how the people that's coming up after them, kind of move forward with it within their lives. So shout out to mentors and role models for being there for us. Even if you don't have it in your family. I got a high school mentor that helped me through my ways in high school. Shout out to Peter Wilson. Shout out to organizations. I had an organization allow me to travel, see the world, open my mind.
That's right.
Military gave that to us too, man.
No question, man. And let me just say, even though my mother could never afford to provide me the resources to excel, to ascend, she gave me the belief that I could do it. And I got to tell you, you can't put a price on that. That was priceless.
Absolutely.
So shout out to my mom, who just pushed me, says, I'm not going to have the money to do it, but I believe enough in you. She instilled in me to let me know I was her king.
Yeah.
And I had royalty based on just our lineage. And that I did not need to be beholden to having less. Because let me tell you, if it's not a culture shock going to a predominantly white institution, which I started out, it's even more of a culture shock going to a historically Black college university where there was wealth on campus, cars, coats. I mean, CEOs as a sophomore walking around campus, they had the access. A lot of them were legacy students from their parents. It was so refreshing to see that, because that just was not part of my dinner table conversation in my neighborhood. So you're right.
You. Chief, your story sounds similar to mine, man. I went to a PWI when I was 17, 18 in Greencastle, Indiana. Shout out to DePaul University. Then I went and graduated when I joined the military at Lincoln University of Missouri, which is an HBCU,
Yes, it is. I'm no one.
But it's the want to and the needs to and the have to. It's the how dare you fail. How dare you fail when people have gone through harder times and they've given you the opportunity now to succeed? How dare you fail? That was the mentality for me moving forward anyways.
And I rejected the notion of handouts. Everything I've earned. And we'll get into that more into my dissertation, which in celebrating the 102nd birthday of the Army Warrant Officer Corps, I was able to locate in my participants 10 gentlemen who retired at the highest rank of the Army Warrant Officer Corps, which is no easy task to achieve CW5. I'm blessed to have been able to do so, but especially as an African-American, given our military history where African-Americans were subservient and could not serve and have the same capacity as their white soldiers, though they may have had the same rank, they were not given the same access. And more importantly, Otis, if you can believe it, and I'm sure as a veteran yourself, the same pay. Can you imagine being an 01 African-American male against your 01 Caucasian male? You could not lead soldiers that didn't look like you. You did not receive the same pay as your white male counterpart did. These are stories that have to be told. So while I am celebrating the Warrant Officer Corps, I am particularly, especially with the climate that we're in, celebrating our history, because it's not been told. It has not been told.
Excellent. Well, now's the time to tell that history. You like that transition? You like that transition there?
I like it, man.
Let's go into the first slide. So how we're going to do it is we're going to show the full screen, and we will allow folks to, see the information that's being shared. And if I see that there's a moment where people are putting comments or questions, we'll kind of break and kind of address it itself, okay?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So here we go. This is the first one, and we'll do the full screen right here. Go ahead, Chief.
For those that are joining, what you're looking at here is my actual dissertation topic that allowed me to earn my PhD in public management and leadership. I am a Walden University graduate. I finished my dissertation in May of 2019. And on today, I thought it was so apropos to celebrate the 102nd birthday of the Army Warrant Officer Corps. So with that, happy birthday to all my Army Warrant Officers. And let's go to the next slide.
All right.
Though I am a scholar, oftentimes, people may challenge your work. Is it anecdotal? Is it real? This was a very understudied research topic. while I was able to find many dissertations that speaks to African-American sergeant majors, African-American generals, Black soldiers, white soldiers of all branches of service, I could not find a single scholarly piece of information that spoke to Army warrant officers, particularly those of color. So as a result of this daunting Herculean research, the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Walden University bestowed upon me this Leadership Excellence Award. They were so taken and blown away by what I uncovered in my research. And of course, after having graduated in August of 2019, I then became an alumni and was then presented a Military and Veteran Appreciation Award from the same university, now bestowing me as Dr. James J. Williams for the U.S. Army CW5 retired. I could not be happier receiving these. So those are just pieces of evidence in terms of what resulted in my research study. Next slide. This is not possible by yourself. On your far left, you see there I was at age 24 years old enlisting in the Army as a PFC because I'd had college credits. September 19th, 1988, there I was. And on your far right, I had achieved the rank of CW5. Herculean task. They're often called us the unicorns, quiet professionals. All of that is very true. Second row, some of my places that I've been stationed. There in the first pick, second row, I was stationed in Hawaii, United States Pacific Command, where I was a lead in the Cybersecurity Joint Operations Center. The second pick, believe it or not, while in uniform, I taught at night at the University of Phoenix in Kapolei, Hawaii, in Honolulu. So those are my students. The middle pick is the retired CW5 Dave Williams, no relation, who at that time was appointed as the highest ranking Chief Warrant Officer 5 assigned to the Department of the Army as the senior warrant officer for all of the Army. Next slide was just a map of my travels to the Philippines. And then the last pick is a book signing in which I had an opportunity to some leader that I respect, General Colin Powell, at his book signing. I'm also an author. Chasing the Eagle from Dreaming to Achieving Success and Freedom speaks to those very things that you spoke of, Otis, in terms of my rise from poverty to prosperity. So I decided to turn it into a book to encourage others that they can do anything they want if they put their mind to it. The book garnered 8 international awards, and as a result of that, I was asked to join 31 additional leaders, which prompted the second book, Mission Unstoppable, a book of 31 leaders who shared their stories from failure to blessings. Bottom, my family is the center of gravity. That's my wife and son. We were also philanthropists while serving. There they were collecting for the Salvation Army. The second pick at the bottom, my son and I had a day at his school in Hawaii, father and son day breakfast. The middle pick, no surprise, very pinnacle moment in my military career where my wife and son pinned on the rank of CW5 at the Pentagon. Monumental moment. Again, I am a family that likes to have balance. So there's the fourth pick where we're at Legoland. And let me just say, not the Legoland in California. This was Legoland in Tokyo, Japan, where we spent spring break while stationed in Hawaii. We flew 9 hours from Hawaii to Tokyo, and we painted the town. We went to Disneyland. They were celebrating their 30th anniversary, and my son's a big Lego collector, builder, and so we went to the Legoland there. And then the last pick is, again, we like to travel and enjoy ourselves. That is off the coast of St. Martin on an island called Anguilla. You're probably familiar with it. We spent a week there, and as I tell you to date, I've not had a vacation that matched that experience. It was fantastic. So that kind of gives you a capsule version of me and where I came from. Of course, the middle text speaks to my, accomplishments, being Cleveland, Ohio, working at Northrop Grumman in cyber management, award-winning author. My undergrad was in computer information systems. My master's was in public administration. And of course, my PhD was in public management and leadership. And let me just say, this is not to disparage those honorary doctorates. If you've done the work and it's been recognized by a university, fantastic. Mine was blood, sweat, and tears, namely 8 years of solid research to walk across that stage and earn this doctorate. So I'm really proud of that.
Excellent.
And then my quote is, there is no elevator to success. Take the stairs. I've climbed a lot of stairs to get where I'm at today, and I like to share it with everyone who's listening.
Talk to me. What does that mean? I know you're speaking about it figuratively with there's no elevator to success, but what does that mean? Make it make sense for us.
Sure, I can use the military reference. You know, oftentimes there's a sense of entitlement. I've seen it where folks feel that just because they may have been an academy graduate, had a certain MOS, that warranted them the rank, that warranted them the success by entitlement. Their family may have been legacy military family members. I was not a part of that group. But even in the corporate space, you know, people tend to think that Ivy League colleges yields the ideal position. And what we're finding is that that's just not true. This epidemic, COVID-19 pandemic, is showing that kids graduating with mounds of student loans can't find a job, and your degree may not necessarily warrant the success that you're after. You may have to start from the ground, exercise some humility, and work your way up, which is what I did. Nothing I did was ever handed to me. I had to look at people that didn't like me, that didn't look like me, that felt that I didn't belong. It's called the imposter syndrome. That's a term used in the scholarly community, where you just don't feel like you fit in even though you're there. I've experienced that. I've been blessed to have many assignments in which, in the eyes of some, had no business being there. But it was ordered by the steps of God that allowed me to get there. And I made sure to represent in those spaces where I may have been the only face. So that's what I mean by there's no elevator. There's no quick fix. You're going to have to climb each stairway to get to, and there are those that jump and get on the elevator. But what you find is when they get to that level, they were not ready. So you have the title, but you don't have the substance, the content, the acumen that the others who've worked hard may have had that are there. And it always shows itself in the end, Otis. It will never lie.
Let me ask you something. So I understand the imposter syndrome deal. That's something that I suffered from, and something that I brought up multiple times, where, you know, I don't think I'm worthy being where I'm you know, wherever it is I'm at, whether it be in academic space or workspace. I'm outperforming what, you know, people expect of me, but I still don't feel quite worthy. What's the opposite of that, where you're absolutely crushing it, but you're not given the accolades, recognition, or the pay for that position? What's the how do you deal with that?
The opposite, and that's a very good question, which is what was used in these 10 participants in my research study, and it is called, drum roll, wait for it, intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. And what that means is you have to climb inside of yourself and know that there is an opposite opportunity than the circumstances that you're in. And let me just add to what you just said. Imposter syndrome is not necessarily based on race. It can also be based on class. Imagine me, this kid that grew up in the hood, food stamps, public assistance, going to a very established African-American population of students. You can also feel an imposter syndrome there as well. So I want those that are listening to not just take this as white, black. It can be black, black. It can be Asian and Asian. It does not matter. Classism is a thing.
Hey, I anticipate that this discussion is going to go awesome. You want to jump into the next slide?
Absolutely.
All right, let's jump into the next slide.
So for those of you who are U.S. taxpayers, it is incumbent upon you to know what you're paying for. It is surprising to me the number of folks that have no idea who warrant officers are or what they do. So this slide depicts the various rank structure, enlisted ranks E1 through E9. The officer ranks 01 through 010. We often speak of sergeant majors and 4-star generals and brigadier generals. but you never hear really discussion about warrant officers, whether it's W1 through 5. So the ranking structure, ideally, if we was to chronologically assess this, the warrant officer rank would actually be in the middle between the enlisted and the officer ranks. So, for example, if you are an E9 Sergeant Major, the next rank would be W1. The W1 outranks the enlisted E9, even though the E9 is a very respected rank, not easy to achieve. But Warrant Officer 1 outranks the E9s. CW5, respectively, is a rank below O1. So what I'm getting at is the Warrant Officer rank is a specialized group of officers who have technical acumen in their specific field. And let me just finally say that many are confused to think if you're a warrant officer, you're only dealing with pilots and aircrafts. The Warrant Officer Corps has every discipline that the enlisted, just about, and the officer have. You have a cooks, medical equipment technicians, supply, Adjutant General Corps, signal. There are warrant officers in those spaces. So that's just a capsule version of the rank structure. And I would really want to educate all those that are listening. Please avail yourselves to know what warrant officers do. Warrant officers are 2% of the total Army. So we're a small group. And if you're talking about African Americans, we're even smaller. And that's why I want to highlight the contributions made by the Warrant Officer Corps. Next slide. So as I previously mentioned, we were once a segregated military. White soldiers were separated from black soldiers, though they may have had the same rank. In fact, many times enlisted soldiers were often allowed to serve to be at the subsistence of their white male officers and enlisted. So they would be peeling potatoes, shining shoes. They didn't do it for combat purposes, although that was their intention. African Americans always had pride in wanting to serve their country, even though the country may not have been very kind to them. And so initially, it was very separate. And it wasn't until 1948, when the executive order was signed, that started the integration process that allowed white soldiers and black soldiers to serve together. Let me make sure we're clear. That was not a kumbaya moment initially. It took a number of years for this to finally become a fully integrated force where there was harmony within it. So I want to make sure that folks understand the history. You couldn't just come in, raise your right hand, and you were welcome. Not at all. Next slide. So again, as I previously mentioned, what is a warrant officer? And there you have it. Warrant officer is an officer in the armed forces ranking below the commissioned officers, yet above the non-commissioned officers. This was established on July 9th, 1918. And today, July 9th, 2020, we're celebrating 102nd birthday of the Warrant Officer Corps. And again, according to the 2018 Department of Statistics, 3% of the total Army, 64% are white, 17% are black. Now, that was in 2018. I would dare say that those statistics even look more grim now amidst our social ills that we're faced with, coupled with the pandemic. Next slide, please. This is the rank structure. So to get from W1 to W2, it's 2 years, time and grade. From 2 to 3, 4 to 5 years, time and grade. 3 to 4, 4 to 5 years. And CW4 to CW5 can often be a 5-year process, depending. A few years ago, we had a complete scrub of getting folks promoted faster, because what we found was there was a bottleneck of folks not being promoted, either because their leadership did not allow them to get to the schools that they needed, that you needed to qualify for in order to meet the next rank. And so what they found, that there was a shortage. And I happened to fall within that year group. So after 5 years of CW4, I was able to achieve CW5 within 3 years based on the need. And if you're talking about a very competitive process that year, boy, I was very fortunate. However, I went to the schools. I made sure they had the degree qualifications. I made sure that I was in assignments where your senior rater is the calling card for you to be looked at favorably or not to go to the next rank. So for those warrants, and again, no judgment, that stayed in the same position for whatever reason, it could be family, somebody at home that they love, they can't leave to move on. It really costs you in the end in terms of upper mobility. One other thing I'd like to add is that in the reserve component, it's 5 to 6 years. So in the active duty, it's every 4 to 5 years for promotion. In the reserve component, because it's slot based, it's every 5 to 6 years. And the blue at the very bottom depicts those who are aviators. That's a different set of criteria, even more competitive. Next slide, please. So why this study, Otis? Man, when I first set out to do my PhD, I was not interested in doing anything military at all. My goal was to deal with cybersecurity policy and how that could be better implemented across our allies and across the globe, having been in those spaces where I was conducting briefings to the armed forces of the Philippines, and they were using Yahoo to conduct business, and I was able to convince them that, hey, let us use a vulnerability scan to show you how vulnerable your networks are so we can secure them. So that was going to be my research study. But what happened was, by happenstance, I had someone approach me saying, hey, Chief Williams, you're a unicorn around here. I'm like, yeah, I hear that a lot. How is it that you were able to get to CW5, excuse me, as an African American? And that blew me away, because up to this point, I'm thinking, okay, the bill has been signed, 1948, everything's equal, it's all based on merit, this is utopia. But they still wanted to tie race to my rank as if this was the affirmative action of the military. And I was taken aback.
Hold on. Let me do a quick cut there back to our screen. This is where I'm going to cut for a moment and ask.
Yeah.
I mean, Chief, you've got so many years in this world and so many years in that military.
Yeah.
Why would you be taken aback by people's, for lack of a better word, very ignorant comment?
Well, let me just first say, it's not that we ever achieve to be accepted. And I think too often people get the titles, the positions. This is both military and civilian, because again, I was dual career, where folks want to be accepted by white people. I'm just going to put it plain where you can understand. We want to be validated. I was just happy based on my circumstances. They didn't know my circumstances growing up in poverty. In fact, I didn't even know about the Warrant Officer Corps, Otis, until another officer mentions, hey, you ever thought of being a Warrant Officer Corps? Because as enlisted, I did a lot of briefings to bring in enlisted folks who had never signed the military for, and it was my job to let them know all the benefits, provide briefings, bring in folks. I was that dude for 10 years. From E3 to E5, which is egregious. And the reason it was egregious is because I had a boss who made sure that my success was not going to be unless he had input in it. And that just unnerved me. And can I just say, he looked like me too? So again, I want to make sure people understand, everything is not racial. Bias is bias. And I had to go around him and meet with the recruiter I've never met to sign the paperwork, to fill out the packet. And as an E5, because let me tell you, usually when you're going to get accepted to the Warrant Officer Corps, you need to be at least an E6, although E5s can apply. So I'm competing with E5s, E6, E7s, and E8s, and I got in. I still have that letter. As an E5, it shocked the entire unit. Number one, they didn't know, because when the writing was on the wall and I realized, okay, I'm not going to get any support here, I had to take matters into my own hands. Because my thought was, when I signed the dotted line September 19th of 1988, I don't remember seeing any of you guys there. I'd be damned if I'm going to let you dictate my career path while I recognize that your influence can help. While I recognize that your influence can help, this is my career. So I say all that to say, when I reached CW5, I climbed a lot of stairs. I would almost say I climbed the Great Wall of China to get to CW5. And so it just unnerved me that this statement could be made, whether it was intentional or not. I froze. And I says, wow.
That's a passive aggressive statement. It's a hell of a
absolutely.
It's a hell of a microaggression, man.
Perhaps microaggression. You could not have said it better. Even when you get to this point, it's still like, why you? How did you? What makes you? Otis, I can tell you this: when I worked at the final assignment at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the pinnacle of any assignment in your career, where I'm briefing 3 stars, generals, admirals, I still had arrogant academy graduates from the Army and the Navy come into the space where I work, because I was a battle captain. They gave me this look without ever saying a word. What are you doing here? This was in 2018. What are you doing here, Chief? One person actually verbally said it. What are you doing here, Chief? CW5, certainly in the Army, a very respected rank by all accounts. Not that no one's service should be minimized, but especially at CW5, you know some things. But I always exercise humility, Otis, because my thing is, just the reaction I was expecting. I was well trained in my brain not to respond outwardly, because the bottom line is I'm there. And I'm not going anywhere. So deal with it.
Love it. Love it. Let's jump into the slides again, Chief.
All right.
Next slide.
We're going to stay on the slide. So the reason for this study, Otis, is because prior to 1941, there was no data on the service of African Americans in the Warrant Officer Corps. I was shocked. There were barriers to promotions in that corps that were never highlighted to the forefront. And more importantly, while the Warrant Officer Corps is small and achieving the ranks of CW5 is even smaller than that was seeing African American men achieving those ranks. There were no captured experiences of those who served at the CW5 rank. So I sought to find out, there's got to be some retired CW5s that can share their success strategies and motivational factors, getting back to intrinsic motivation, that can share their experiences in a scholarly fashion so that this could not be disputed, that this could not be looked at as anecdotal chatter. So I set out on that study. Next slide. So the purpose was a phenomenological research study, which is a study that allows you to capture the lived experiences, in this case of African American men who achieved the highest rank of CW5. Man, if I cannot, when I tell you this was the most Herculean task of my career, that's still not saying enough. And the reason is because I had to walk a very thin line. I didn't want to get my brothers in trouble who were already still on active duty. Excuse me. So I didn't want to go through the red tape of asking these guys to, which they would have certainly been pseudo-coded and not revealed, but these were these guys' careers. They're trying to serve with dignity, with the DD-214, with honorable discharge, without anything about race. So I had to shift my thinking, Otis, to retired CW5s, those that have already retired, receiving their pension, received the honorable discharge, and that could speak freely. So that was my quest. And so the social impact of this data would inform policy makers, recruiters at the service level, as well as at the D level, to really look at how are we recruiting our soldiers of all races, but particularly African Americans, where there's equity and meritocracy, as it's so stated in the Army Creed. And I'm hoping that this provides a blueprint for aspiring soldiers in all branches of service in navigating their career path. So there are some nuggets that these participants left that can hopefully lead to not only in the government sector, but even as you transition to the private sector. Next slide. So I came up with 3 research questions. My main research question was, how do retired African-American officers describe their experience of attaining the rank of senior field grade warrant officer, CW5 or W5, in the United States Army Warrant Officer Corps? That was followed by 2 sub-questions, Otis, which was, what are the experiences which shaped the achievements of African-American men serving in senior leadership positions in the Army Warrant Officer Corps? And then finally, what strategies do African-American men believe they used to reach the rank of senior field grade warrant officer, or CW5? Those were the research questions which formulated my research. Next slide. Again, this was a qualitative study that allowed me to capture the lived experiences of these participants. By the way, no one ever asked them. And if the Army warrant officers are described as the quiet professionals, let me tell you, my friend, African Americans were on mute. They were on mute. They weren't even thought of to share an experience, certainly not at a scholarly level. Shout out to retired CW4 Pharrell Childs, who was the first to do research in terms of a book entitled African American Warrant Officers, Our Service to This Country. He did a 3-book series. We're good friends today. And he was the genesis behind me taking this on. He pushed me. I was like, man, I don't know. This is Herculean. He said, you can do it, Chief. And so I really got to thank him for giving me this opportunity. And then finally, I used the Van Camp method by Moustakis, which again allows the researcher to investigate these lived experiences of participants. Next slide. So the search was on. How am I going to find any warrant officer who is willing to talk to me about their experience of achieving CW5? And I was very clear, much love and respect to all warrant officers of all ranks, much love and respect to both male and female. But as an African-American male myself, and I wanted to be very clear not to include my own implicit bias of how I got there, I was only looking for African-American men. So I want to make sure that that's understood. So the way I went about it, I tapped the executive director. His name is Jack Dutille. Shout out to Jack, who was the executive director of the Army Warrant Officer Association. And he provided me a population of 300 names of people that served in that organization. But guess what the problem was? He had not parsed the data by race or gender. So guess what I had to do? I had to solicit all 300 names about my study, though I'm only looking for African-American men who retired at the rank of CW5. But you know something, Otis? The strangest thing happened. Man, my email was flooded with white females, white males, those of German descent. I mean, they were practically using me as, the ancestry to find their genealogy. Chief Williams, I am of Irish ancestry, but I would love to participate in your study. I was so humbled by that. And then there were those that says, I'm a white female. I know I don't fit the description, but go for it, Chief. You're going to do fine. I never met these people before. It was so humbling. The other concern I had was who in the African-American community, namely these CW5 males, would even be willing to talk after 20, 30, and in some cases, 40 years of service. Once they retire, they want to go cut grass, sit on the porch, drink iced tea. They didn't want to. That was that issue. And then the other issue was how many would be able to recall their experiences for that long ago? Keep in mind, again, Alzheimer's and dementia is a thing, Otis. And again, not to cast aspersion, but I had to make sure that I screened them very carefully, because how am I going to challenge their experiences? These were their experiences. But I also knew that warrant officers are sharp, if I may brag on this myself. And I found that the recall was as if it happened yesterday. So in the final analysis, I was able to get 32 respondents, 15 finalists, and of those 15 finalists, 10 participated in the final sample size of the study. And the inclusion-exclusion was, again, the following: African-American men. You had to be in the Army Warrant Officer Corps, not Marines, not Coast Guard, not Navy, but Army. and you had to retire at the rank of CW5. Again, much love to all of our other ranks. Pharrell Childs did a wonderful book capturing all ranks, but for this particular research study, I wanted to speak to those that made it to the top, like the sergeant majors, like the brigadier generals, like the 4-star generals. There was no mention of that in any of my research study, so I had to create it. Next slide. And this is the money slide right here, Otis, because here what you're looking at are 10 pseudo-named participants who participated in my study. And I want to bring your attention to the educational levels, which was so gratifying, man. I can't even tell you. Master's degrees. We had 2 people that had PhDs as warrants. And if I may just digress for just a moment, when I worked at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was then pursuing my PhD. I was actually working on my dissertation. And I had one white officer come to me saying, Chief, I'm hearing, because I never talk about myself. It was in my resume. It was in my board file, which allowed me to get the assignment. But word travels, I'm telling you. And so I had this one white officer says, Chief, why are you pursuing a PhD? You're already at CW5. Why aim that high? Again, another shocking moment, much like why are you CW5 as an African-American? It never stops. And all I could do was smile because the bottom line was, I'm going to get this PhD. And God forbid I shared with them what my dissertation topic was, which I did not. So it was very gratifying to see what I'm getting at is with these educational levels of the participants, PhDs, bachelor's degrees, associate's degrees. The numbers of years it took from W1 to W5, if you look at that column, on average, it's about 18 to 20 years, which is accurate. But here's where it gets juicy. Next slide. I'm sorry, next column. The average length of service total. Only one person was less than 30 years. Everyone else, 30 and over. And let me invite your attention to at least 3 of them, Daryl, Isaac, and Jasper. Notice how I used the names to represent our community. No applause, no applause. 40 years and 43 years. And keep in mind, the reason that's significant is because when you serve 40 years, you get 100% base pay post-retirement. 100%. So while 20 years is certainly great, and if you're talking to reaching CW5, there's no way that I've seen that you could achieve CW5 in 20 years because you need more than half of those years just to get to the qualification level to apply for warrant officer. So that was exciting. And that gets to the next column, which E5s, E6s, E7s, those were the average ranks when they put in their packet. And then the following column speaks to that they all retired at CW5. But here's where it really got interesting. You know, we always use the term Otis. We're not all a monolithic group. Look at the military career fields. Look how vast that is. You have human resources, electronic systems, nuclear warfare systems, CID special agents, automotive maintenance, information technology. So for those naysayers that felt that, oh, you just took an easy MOS, not that any MOS is easy in the Warrant Officer Corps, look at these skill sets. Speaks volumes. So it gets back to your question about intrinsic motivation. MOS be damned. If I'm going to reach CW5, I'm going to have to put some strategies in place, which we'll get into in the future slides. And these gentlemen told their stories. Let me tell you, there was one person, let me see which one that was, who the pseudo name. I think it was Isaac. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Isaac. It was Gerard. Gut-wrenching interview. I had to pause because he had an emotional moment. 2 reasons. One, he was so humbled that I would even take the time to interview him to put him in a scholarly dissertation. But more importantly, too, Otis, he had to relive as he's answering questions that I asked in my interview with him. How did he get to A to B? Did he experience bias, racism, prejudice? And this guy literally was in tears. And so I had to pause.
Understood. It's those moments are super traumatic, you know, especially if one had to go through, you know, they say, hey, we go through hurdles in our life, but sometimes people put extra hurdles with barbed wire and lions and bullets around those hurdles,
Yeah.
those unnecessary hurdles that people had to go through in their careers. And it's, you know, it's gut wrenching, it's tiring, but
It is.
I don't necessarily even agree that once you come out of it, it's sweeter. It's like a juice that was it worth even going through what I had to go through?
Absolutely, man.
I
That's a good
understand.
point.
Yeah. I understand. I understand. So
Yeah.
let's go back to the slide.
And I'll move along because I know I'm being mindful of our time. So, yeah. And then finally, that was with the dates of interview. So this was the money slide. Now, here are the themes, Otis, that came from these experiences that more often than not, there was an overwhelming number of participants that had common themes, and they are what you see here. Competence in your primary function. You need to know your skill set inside and out. Aspiration. There was one participant I recall who said, I just like the way the warrant officers wore their uniform. It inspired me to become one. Overcoming barriers to promotion. One particular participant was denied 3 times. 3. And on the 4th time, it was because he had a new officer in charge, who, by the way, was white, saw that he had been denied 3 times, but he also sent him to school, which was the other piece that I spoke of. You have to meet the military educational requirements. So he went on and got his military education requirements and therefore was able to overcome the barrier and got promoted. Proven leadership style. Mentorship, very important. And let me just say, mentorship does not have to be someone that looks like you. So we have to get out of this isolation mode. And I'm talking to my African-American brothers and sisters. We cling to what's familiar, but sometimes that can stunt your growth. There was a study done in 1996 where the reason why African-American and white officers weren't at the same level and rate of speed for promotion is because the African-Americans felt that imposter syndrome that we spoke of earlier. They would not do the kinds of things that many Caucasian officers did, like golf, like various social network engagements. They clung to their own because that's what's familiar. And oftentimes it hurt them in terms of upward mobility. Educational opportunities. There were some in which they said, I couldn't go to the college in my town. These mostly was done in the southeastern part of the United States. So they joined the military. One guy actually graduated valedictorian in his high school, and no white school would allow him to join college. But more than that, he didn't have money to go to school, which is why I make the point. If you're fortunate enough to have resources, use them. Establish a career roadmap. Excel through the Army promotion system. And by and large, overwhelmingly, all participants agreed that they prayed a lot, that their faith, which is also complementary to intrinsic motivation. You know, we're a family of faith, Otis. That's no surprise. And our faith can carry us much further than the rank will. And in this case, it was a very successful theme for these gentlemen. Next slide. So getting back to the research question, I won't read it. There it is. The 2 themes that stood out was aspiration and educational opportunities. That's how they made their experiences they made sure they went to the schools. They made sure they got their education. So when it came time to being promoted, you couldn't question that they were qualified. Next slide. Same question. I won't read it again. The themes were overcoming barriers to promotion, mentorship, and faith. Those were the experiences that shaped them to serve in CW5 capacity and senior leadership. Next slide. Strategy again, competence in your primary functional area, proven leadership style, excel through the Army promotion system, and again, establish a career roadmap. I had one participant tell me, Chief, whenever I got promoted to CW2, I was already thinking CW4. I jumped 2 ranks above my current rank because I didn't want to rest on my laurels. So he thought ahead. He was already preparing for the next rank, and he was successful. Next slide. So how does this relate to the literature? Well, in my literature review, These were the topics: meritocracy, factor fallacy, achievement scores, tests in black and white, African-American men and mentoring, race and leadership. And please pay particular attention to that final bullet: black male leaders and white male subordinates. Who hasn't seen that, whether it's military or corporate? So let me just run through them real quickly. Meritocracy. So you're supposed to be given your promotion by basic means of meritocracy. We found that implicit bias often sort of trumped meritocracy. Achievement test scores. As you know, the ASVAB test is the calling card, quite frankly, that's going to dictate your career path. So the test scores in black and white are literally what they meant. Black soldiers significantly performed poorly than white soldiers when they took the ASVAB. So therefore, they were given skills that were not necessarily transferable. I don't want to use the words that were not helpful in their career, because any MOS that the Army needs is helpful, but you also need to think in terms of a transferable skill. Let's not kid ourselves. You don't see tanks driving in traffic around the Beltway going to work. Okay. African-American men in mentoring. Many of them said their mentors were white. Others said there were some that looked just like them. And that was in my literature review, which again is a 150-page dissertation. I'm just giving a capsule version here. Race and leadership. How does one need to look to be deemed a leader? Keep in mind, we're not too far from the slave moments of our time. Blacks were never equipped or trained to be leaders because we were always subservient to the slave master. So where was our blueprint? We had to create one. And that's where the faith came in. And then this is my favorite: black male leaders and white male subordinates. And in my dissertation, I highlighted the both presidential campaigns with Barack Obama. What were the factors that made voters believe he was the president of the free world? And one of the things that was mentioned was physical fitness. Lean and tall, just like we see in the military. Charismatic leadership. These were from white male subordinates that say when they look at a leader, they want someone that fits the part. So the whole idea of need to be articulate, all that's well and good, but there were other factors. Trustworthiness. But the main one was how you physically looked. So if you're kind of sloppy, maybe a little thick around the edges, you don't represent leadership, because we tend to associate that with mean and lean. Next slide. This was the conceptual theoretic framework, Otis, that I used. Upper echelon theory, the McClellan theory, and the resiliency theory. Those were the theories that allowed these 10 participants to not only thrive, but excel and ascend to the highest ranks in CW5 and the Army Warrant Officer Corps. And I just could not be more humbled to take on the research. I was so worried that I would never get through with this, but through theories like this, it allowed me to find more and uncover more, and it just made my dissertation soar. Next slide. So the social implications are as follows. Future studies can be expanded upon. Now you can include women, Hispanic, Latinx, if you will. This could be a model used both in the public and the private sector to create a diverse workforce. In my opinion, and this is mine alone, it is not enough to hire a chief diversity officer in a corporation that may not be as diverse. It's almost a moot point, in my opinion. More than that, what you really need to look at is, what does the board of directorship look like? Are they too diverse? And I'm talking in the corporate space. We also see that when you look, if you've ever gone into the pentagram, and I've often walked across the room, and a lot of the senior officers in certain directorates were white males. White males, maybe one hint of an African-American hue, maybe one female, not necessarily African-American, but just female. So the point I'm making is that it's more than just having a diversity workshop once or twice a year, check the block, get your pay for being that if you're a consultant on the outside. That's not enough. We're seeing that as it unfolds now in what's going on outside of our doors. which I know this is not the discussion for that, but what I'm hopeful is that what we're seeing is the integration of our brothers and sisters of all hues, much like the integration signed in 1948, the executive order that integrated the military. So I'm very hopeful. And the other thing I just want to point out was this dissertation was meant to be a strength-based dissertation. Notice I didn't bring up the whole racial epithet and why blacks aren't able to make CW5. I pointed out those that did. And that is why I'm celebrating all Army warrant officers, but in particular, African-American warrant officers of all ranks, but in particular, beyond that, CW5s. So this is meant to be a strength-based research topic because I'm a positive guy. I want to show the other side. We know what exists, but for those who are in doubt, you can do it. I've just shared my story. I didn't expect to join the military, much less join the Warrant Officer Corps, much less become CW5, much less go all the way up and receive a terminal degree. That was never a discussion in my home in Cleveland, Ohio. Next slide. So I always end with a trivia question. And these are the 3 trivia questions that I ask. Who was the first and only African-American 4-star to be appointed at the Joint Chiefs of Staff as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
I know that answer.
We'll get to that in the next slide. You better know it. And who was the first appointed African-American senior warrant officer? I gave that away early on. We're going to wait for the next slide, though, for the Department of the Army. But here's a tricky one. Who was the first, the uno numero, African-American Army warrant officer? Let's go to the next slide.
Oh.
No surprise, General Colin Powell, first and only to this day, appointed as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which I was very privileged to work in my last assignment. Second is the CW5 David Williams. You may have seen him earlier in my slide where I was shaking his hand at his retirement. And sadly, Otis, you see a hollow silhouette in the 3rd slide. This was the genesis behind my doing this research paper. Because my friend, as it stands right now, there is no confirmed name that I can present to you and the listening audience as who was the first. And that's sad to me. This speaks to our culture. We are a very oratory culture. You don't believe me? Check your cell phone bill. We love to talk for hours, but we don't archive enough. I'm not going to say we don't archive plenty. There's plenty of people that are writing, putting script, but we need to do more. And more than that, we need to tell our own stories. Can I tell you that when I presented this research paper to the Walden University dissertation students, because I do that periodically to let them know what it looks like, I've received an overwhelming positive response, Otis, so much so that I am now being tagged to do a documentary. I've never done a documentary before. They're like, Chief, this is so great research. You need to turn this into a documentary. And the first person that comes to mind, who comes to mind when you think of documentaries? I'm going to challenge you now. Ken Burns.
That's it, Ken Burns.
Ken Burns, who does fantastic work. But again, why can't we be our own Ken Burns? And so I got to tell you, this got my juices flowing a little bit. I'd have to see what I could do to put a team together, but wouldn't that be great?
You see the mannerisms that.
Okay. Well, you know what? And this was just 3 weeks ago. It's been on my mind, Otis, ever since. And I know I can gather the people. I have no problem, but it's the putting it to, I'm not a filmmaker. I can tell great stories because I am an author. I can tell great research stories because I just published. But boy, wouldn't that be great to actually have these guys on your viewing channel at home, because you don't see that. If you look at Ken Burns' work, Otis, you don't see warrant officers. It's always the Vietnam, and again, the Vietnam era got me here, so no disrespect at all. But you don't see warrant officers being asked questions about their experiences. You'll see sergeant majors, you'll see brigadier generals, you'll see a couple of sprinkling officers, but never warrant officers. And that frustrates me. When I look at this third hollow silhouette, that we can't even tell the world who the first African-American warrant officer is. That is disturbing. Disturbing. And if you notice, that was in my slide where there were no experiences, because think about it. If you were in slave time, the only time copious notes were taken, Otis, is to determine the weight of the baby, the birth of the baby, how strong they were because of their physical labor. Oh, they took very copious notes for their property. But in terms of accomplishments in service, yes, there are historical evidence on that, but not many. And in the Warrant Officer Corps, which was established in 1918, you're telling me that there are no accounts for African Americans in their service to this country as warrant officers? So I don't know where this is going to lead to, but you see it garnered the awards. I mean, scholars of all hues were just blown away. Taxpayers, if you're listening, you just got education that you would not get seeing it on your W-2 stub. You need to avail yourselves to learning. Next slide. That's my contact information. I don't know if we skipped something or not.
Did we?
Oh, here we go.
Right.
Yeah. This is a famous quote that I love by Chinua Achebe. Until the lions have their own historians, the history will always glorify the hunter. Folks, we got to be our own historians. Love the works of Kim Burns, but I'll tell you right now, it is unnerving. I'm like, there's no person with the skill set that can tell our own stories. But here's the problem. We often think that the ice is colder on the other side, if you know what I mean. And we need to get out of that mentality. Oh, it's believable if someone else that doesn't look like me tells it. I would imagine that people who will see this video will still challenge. Where did Chief get that from? He probably gathered 10 people. No, I didn't. I'm just going to say it up front. This was 7 years of labor, getting through the red tape, getting people to recall their experiences. Because remember, dementia is a thing. I had to trust, have them sign documents, disclosure statements, me protecting who they are, because maybe, how am I going to challenge their experience? I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I was so pleased that these guys had a recall that was uncanny. So next slide. Again, my contact information. And this concludes my presentation. Happy birthday to all the Army Warrant Officers, and especially my retired CW5s. I salute you.
Chief.
Yes.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Absolutely great information. More than anything, it shows me that there is an avenue that those who are inspired to tell stories and celebrate heroes, that avenue is there. So we're gonna have to talk a little bit once we're done with this thing.
Sure.
To see to talk about that avenue. Let's just leave it at that.
I'm open to the exploration.
Okay.
Let me just say, you know, in my book, Chasing the Eagle, again, it tells the story that I kind of gave a capsule version of at the beginning of the show. You know, oftentimes we like to escape the negative elements that we grew up in, but I felt it my responsibility because there are a lot of James Williamses out there, Otis. And what I've also learned is that within 1 mile radius of any zip code around the world, there is greatness. I'm an example of that. Yeah. No one looked at me where I grew up and thought I would be here. And it's not that they weren't paying attention, but everyone was in survival mode, you know? And so I had to find motivation within myself from my mom, who never finished 9th grade, who was often degraded, if I can be very candid, for trying to fill out an application just to be a cashier at a store. Yeah. And that still bothers her to this day. And so this is my way of saying, I got you, Mom. I got you. So that's why I say this is her doctorate as well, because she gave me the wisdom that no college professor could have given me. And that was the belief. And so for those of you out there who have family members, coaches, loved ones who just give you the belief, package that up, put it in a safety deposit box, go back to it when you need it, because that is valuable. That is valuable. It is why I'm here today.
Excellent. Chief,
Yes, sir.
this has been splendid. I really appreciate you
Thank you,
coming and
man.
just talking and sharing your story. You know, it's a heck of an inspirational thing personally that I enjoy personally. So that's why
Glad you
I
did.
actually want to talk to you after this
Okay.
discussion is over to see how I can assist in your future endeavors.
I thought I was done, man. I'm sitting back, scratching my belly, eating chili fries, but I guess I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to get back out at it. So I have been pondering this, but I do need the support because I could tell the story. I think I can assemble those that would want to share it, but I welcome it. So I'll leave it there.
Roger. So before we go, we got actually
Yes.
2 comments that came on to the discussion. I'll show
Okay.
them on screen. We've got one from Tanya Ford. What's going on? She's one of my biggest supporters. She's my
I've
sorority
seen
sister.
her name on the other shows. Yes.
Shout out to her. She is
Yes.
enjoying this.
Great.
And we've got another one here from Miss Natasha Hines. She said, "That was awesome. I learned a lot about the U.S. Army Warrant Officer Corps. I'll tell you what, sir. It is the overlooked Corps.
It is the overlooked
I'll be
Corps.
blunt about it. It is overlooked. I remember having, through my junior enlisted and then my junior officer time, they were the quiet professionals. They were the guys who you see sometimes being really specialized in certain areas. And,
Yes.
you're like, are they in the military or are they not?
Yeah.
But, I'm glad that I got a chance to humanize what the warrant officer is and who he or she can be. And you're a heck of an inspirational story today and discussion today.
Thank you so much. And that was my intent, is just to share, because many folks who see me, that know me, are very surprised to learn that I'm actually, especially as a retiree, a self-proclaimed introvert. I like my own company. And to your point, many people want to retire and just forget and move on. Yeah. But after doing the dissertation and asked to speak to different students, it has garnered so much attention, I can't even tell you. And so I guess God is not done with me yet, man. So I'm just going to drink lots of water and get a run or two here and there in and get back out there.
Get ready. It's coming.
Oh my God.
Hopefully this discussion inspires us to have more warrant officers to come and actually join us. Well, looks like we got another comment on here. Let's show it. She said, "I know 2 retired African-American U.S. Army warrant officers who own businesses. Chiefs are the bomb."
Yes, they are. And let me just say, more often than not, a lot of the retirees, I know a couple that I'm LinkedIn friends with, own their own businesses. Because if they're going to be subject matter experts for the Army, why not bet on yourself? Why not be the CEO of you and your skill sets? And I've often pondered that. I mean, in my view, I write books and tell stories about situations, and I kind of give back by becoming an adjunct, but it's in me as well. But I have a teenage son who's a rising sophomore. He's our only child. And, there were many times that, I was away from home. And so I want to give him that time. And so for me to be able to speak at organizations, schools, anyone that would have me, my time is valuable, but I'm reasonable. But I think kids need to hear this. I didn't hear this in high school.
Yeah.
Especially our community. And let me just say to those who aspire to become warrant officers, check your ASVAB GT score. I didn't mention that in the slide, but in order to even join the Corps, you need a minimum, of 110 score or higher as a GT score. And quite frankly, Otis, many of the candidates didn't quite apply, and they were too afraid to retest because they may have felt that they weren't going to make it. That's that imposter syndrome I'm talking about, that fear. I would run into enlisted folks, man, I wanted to go warrant, and I would always ask them, well, why didn't you do it? Well, my scores wasn't good enough. Go in and take it again. Yeah. They wouldn't do it. And they weren't surrounded by leadership that told them to go do it, in part because of the selfishness that they didn't want to keep them for their mission. And then 2 months later, that leader is gone and the
Yeah.
person's still stuck there. I've seen so much in 31 years
Yeah.
that I be damned after signing that dotted line 30 years ago that I was going to be the captain of my career. I'm going to listen. I always exercise humility, but in the end, you have to use your final judgment as to why did you serve? Because there are people out there, public sector as well, that will make it their business to say, you're not going to get anywhere without my influence. I've had that happen many times.
Professional jealousy, and then of course envy is one of those things as well. But Chief, I've got to kind of depart from our discussion. Let's go to the broadcast room, talk a little bit more. I'll give you 2 to 3 minutes of something that we could talk about, and we can move on from there. But in closing, Chief, I want to just say thank you for joining me in the discussion today.
Thank you for having me, Otis. It's been a pleasure.
All right, Chief. And so we had a great opportunity to talk to Chief today. Very inspirational, a lot of good information there. Of course, if you want to reach out to him on LinkedIn. That's how we connected. Dr. James Williams, Dr. James J. Williams. He will be there to connect with you, and hopefully you got inspired by his messages today. Hopefully you got inspired to, possibly serve in the military, possibly be a warrant officer, possibly looking for other opportunities to future warrant officers themselves. So, as I always say in part, yourself, take care of your family, others. Bye.